In the late September of 1529, the air over Vienna was heavy with tension, thick with the smoke of distant fires and the scent of damp earth. From atop the city walls, sentries could see the first signs of an approaching threat, a vast army stretching across the plains, banners flickering like ominous stars on the horizon. It was the army of Suleiman the Magnificent, a force trained, disciplined and vast, advancing toward the heart of Europe with a singular purpose: to take Vienna and claim dominance over the region. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath their march. Long columns of janissaries, sipahis and auxiliary forces moved in precise formation, wagons and supply trains groaning under the weight of provisions, weapons and artillery. Smoke from scorched villages dotted the plain as Ottoman light cavalry conducted raids to deny Vienna supplies and strike fear into its inhabitants. The scale of the threat was staggering, and already the city's defenders felt the weight of impending war. Inside Vienna, a city bracing for its first true test in decades, soldiers and civilians worked in tense coordination. Niklas von Salm and Wilhelm von Roggendorf, commanders of the defense, inspected the ramparts, reinforced weak points, and prepared artillery positions. Civilians contributed where they could, hauling stones, filling buckets of boiling water, and strengthening barricades. Every street, tower, and parapet became part of the city's living defense. The first true assaults came not as a thundering all-out attack, but as a series of precise probing strikes, small cuts meant to test Vienna's armor. Like a predator circling injured prey, the Ottomans sought to measure the city's strength before committing to the decisive blow. And Vienna, bracing itself atop Old Stone, felt the weight of every test. Before dawn on September 29th, a thick fog clung to the ground outside the city. From the ramparts, defenders could hear faint movements but could not see their enemy. Horses snorted in the mist, footsteps squelched through wet earth. The uneasy quiet pressed down like a physical weight. Then, without warning, the fog erupted in flame. Ottoman cannons roared to life, their thunder rolling across the plains like the sky cracking open. Fire belched from their bronze mouths, sending iron balls smashing into the outer walls. Chunks of stone exploded outward, showering the streets behind the battlements with dust and rubble. Vienna's cannons answered at once. The city's culverins spat fire from atop towers, falconets shrieked, arquebusiers leaned over parapets, firing down into the haze. The smoke mingled with the morning fog, transforming the world into a swirling battlefield of dim shapes and roaring echoes. A soldier later said, "It was as if the sun rose on a world made of thunder." Out of the fog came the janissaries, advancing with eerie steadiness under the cover of artillery. Shields held high, matchlock guns primed, they approached the southern walls in disciplined lines. Their white felt caps seemed to glow against the grey mist, making them look like spirits gliding forward. They did not shout. They did not break formation. They simply marched, death in motion. Viennese musketeers fired from the walls, and the first line fell. But the janissaries behind them stepped over their fallen comrades, unfazed, returning fire with brutal efficiency. Bullets pinged against stone. Powder smoke drifted upward like ghostly fingers. As more janissaries reached the base of the walls, they slammed heavy scaling ladders into place. Hooks bit into stone. Wood thudded against parapets. Then the assault began in earnest. Defenders met them with halberds, spears, rocks, and even boiling pitch. Men jabbed downward, aiming for faces beneath helmets. Arrows and bolts rained down. Oil and sand cascaded from buckets, making ladder rungs slick with death. Still, the janissaries climbed. One Viennese halberdier, bracing his weapon against the parapet, locked eyes with a janissary only a few feet below him. The man's face was expressionless, unblinking, focused solely on the ascent. The halberdier jabbed downward with all his strength. The janissary fell, but another was already climbing beneath him. The ladders seemed endless. To stem the assault, von Salm ordered concentrated cannon fire directly into the fog-covered ranks below. Culverins thundered. One great bombard fired point-blank into a cluster of ladders, splintering them into shards of blazing timber and hurling bodies in all directions. The blast carved a momentary gap in the assault, but the Janissaries pressed on, regrouping with chilling speed. Meanwhile, musketeers along the walls dipped their match cords into tar-soaked cloth to protect them from the damp. They fired again and again, smoke billowing into the air like a dark crown over the battlements. One defender shouted hoarsely, "Give them nothing, drive them back." While much of the assault pressed along the walls, a second, smaller force probed Vienna's main gates. Ottoman engineers rolled forward heavy mantlets, large wooden shields on wheels, under which they pushed smaller cannon meant to crack the gate's hinges. They fired several rounds, smashing shallow craters into the gate's surface, but Vienna's defenders had prepared well. Thick beams braced the doors from behind. Barrels of earth and rubble buttressed the weak points. The gates held. And when the smoke cleared, crossbow bolts peppered the exposed engineers, forcing them into a hasty retreat. It was only a test, but it showed both sides what would be required when the real assault came. The assault had been fierce, but never reckless. Suleiman had not expected to take the city that day. He had only wanted to learn how Vienna fought, and now he knew. Nightfall and the whisper of shovels. As darkness fell, a new sound drifted through the night, faint, rhythmic, persistent, the sound of digging. The Ottomans had begun their trenches and their mines. They would not stop until they reached the heart of the walls. Vienna had repelled the first assaults, but the true nightmare was only just beginning. Mining was a nightmare unlike any conventional attack. One could see the enemy's assault from afar, brace for cannon fire and repel ladders, but beneath the earth, the enemy was invisible. Engineers warned that if a mine detonated under a wall, hundreds of defenders could be buried instantly. Entire sections of ramparts could vanish in seconds. The Ottomans, experts in subterranean warfare, had used this tactic across Hungary and the Balkans. Vienna would be no exception. Von Salm and Roggendorf ordered immediate countermeasures. Trenches were dug along the inner walls to detect vibration. Guards listened with ear to stone and wood for the faintest sound of digging. Pots of water were balanced on beams, the ripples signaling subtle tremors underground. Engineers created primitive listening devices, hollowed logs pressed against walls, through which the slightest scraping or shift could be detected. When Ottoman miners were discovered, the defenders responded in kind. Countermining parties, teams of Viennese engineers and volunteers, dug shafts of their own, intersecting the enemy tunnels. Darkness swallowed them entirely. Candles burned low, air became scarce. The smell of wet soil and sweat clung to every surface. The sound of pick on stone echoed endlessly, threatening to drive men mad. When shafts met, hand-to-hand combat erupted underground. Swords clanged in the narrow confines. Helmets scraped against beams. Sparks flew from flint matches as combatants struggled in the dark. Screams echoed along the tunnels, swallowed immediately by the earth, leaving others above unaware of the horror unfolding beneath their feet. At times, entire sections of the tunnels collapsed under pressure, trapping men alive and forcing desperate escapes through choke points no wider than a man's shoulders. A soldier recalled decades later, "The earth became alive. It shook, it bit, it suffocated. You could not see, only feel the enemy, only hear the struggle, only pray that the ground did not swallow you whole." Once Ottoman miners reached significant depth beneath the walls, they placed barrels of gunpowder, packed tightly with shavings of wood to act as kindling. The explosion would be catastrophic if undetected. Vienna's engineers responded by digging deep counter-trenches, flooding sections of tunnels with water to collapse shafts, and filling enemy cavities with sand and rubble. At times, defenders poured boiling pitch into holes they had dug themselves, scalding the attackers who were attempting to dig further. Explosions did occur, but not without cost to the Ottomans as well. One blast under the eastern wall threw dirt and stones hundreds of feet into the air, burying dozens of miners in the resulting crater. The defenders rushed to shovels and pickaxes, dragging survivors from the mud while still preparing for the next strike. The city's defense became not just a battle on the walls, but a war beneath them, a second, hidden front. Some soldiers went into the tunnels willingly, some under duress, and some never returned. The claustrophobia, smoke, and constant threat of instant death created a level of tension unmatched anywhere else in the siege. Von Salm and Roggendorf frequently visited the listening posts, shouting encouragement. Their presence reminded soldiers that courage and vigilance were the city's only true allies. By mid-October, the siege had settled into a rhythm of tension, terror, and slow attrition. Vienna's defenders had repelled the first assaults, blocked the initial mines, and stood firm against the Ottoman encirclement. But a new enemy began to gnaw at the city's strength: hunger, disease, and the unrelenting approach of winter. The city's stockpiles were carefully rationed. Grain had been stored in barrels, dried meat hung from rafters, and wine and beer conserved in cellars. But with tens of thousands of refugees now inside the walls, the supplies that once seemed sufficient dwindled rapidly. Daily rations were cut. Loaves of bread became thinner, harder, and bitterer. Meat, once a staple, became a luxury for the wealthiest families, while the poor survived on grains, roots, and the occasional salted fish. Children grew thin, soldiers grew gaunt. Even animals kept within the walls, horses, oxen, and a few herds of cattle, were culled slowly to provide meat for the defenders. Hunger was not immediate death, but it eroded strength, patience, and morale. Soldiers marched and fought on empty bellies, and civilians whispered prayers for another day's survival. Crowding compounded the problem. Tens of thousands of people crammed into narrow streets, courtyards, and hastily reinforced buildings provided perfect conditions for disease. Typhus and dysentery spread silently, striking down the young, the old, and the exhausted. Hospitals, already makeshift, overflowed. Surgeons worked tirelessly, often with little more than knives, boiling water, and bandages. Despite their best efforts, infection claimed lives at a frightening pace. Families who had survived the first attacks now faced illness as a daily threat, another unrelenting enemy within the walls. Smoke from fires used to cook and heat only worsened the air, choking the weak and coughing up ash in eyes already red from sleepless nights. The stench of refuse and the crowded conditions created a bitter, almost tangible reminder that the siege was not fought by swords alone. October in Vienna was rarely gentle. Nights turned icy, the Danube cutting cold winds through the city streets. Soldiers in thin armor shivered atop the walls. Civilians huddled in whatever corner of a home or stable offered warmth. Fires in fireplaces burned constantly, consuming what precious fuel remained. The cold slowed response times. Men carrying buckets of boiling water to pour on attackers struggled to maintain speed and warmth. Musketeers' fingers grew stiff, making loading and firing increasingly difficult. Even artillery crews, moving massive cannon pieces, labored in numb hands. The city's leaders realized that Vienna might not be defeated by cannon fire alone. If the Ottomans could hold the siege long enough, hunger, disease, and cold could do what armies could not. Morale became fragile. Soldiers tired, civilians despaired. Some whispered of surrender, imagining the horrors that might follow, but also contemplating the slow death of starvation. Others clung to faith, repeating prayers aloud in courtyards and along walls. Niklas von Salm, ever the anchor of courage, patrolled the walls daily, shouting encouragement, inspecting defenses, and reminding men that discipline and determination were their weapons against despair. Wilhelm von Roggendorf coordinated supplies with meticulous care, distributing what food and powder remained with strict fairness, ensuring that the men on the front lines received what they needed to continue the fight. Even with leadership present, fear and exhaustion were constant companions. Nights brought fits of coughing, tremors from hunger, and whispered prayers for deliverance. Civilians, though weakened, continued to play vital roles. Women carried water and firewood to the walls, ferried ammunition to the artillery, and repaired barricades damaged during minor Ottoman probes. Children ran messages between towers or delivered powder from stores to soldiers. Every act mattered. Every loaf of bread stretched, every barrel of water conserved, every bucket of stones hurled from the walls contributed to survival. The city had become a single organism, each part dependent on the other, fighting not just the Ottomans but nature itself. Outside the walls, the Ottoman forces recognized the strain on Vienna. They tightened the blockade, sending patrols to prevent any attempt at smuggling supplies. Archers harassed the walls day and night. Engineers and miners continued their work, occasionally breaking through in small skirmishes, testing the defenders' endurance. From Suleiman's tent, orders went out with calm precision. The Sultan understood that victory might not come from a single cannon shot or a scaling ladder, but from patient attrition. Each day the siege continued. Vienna's strength ebbed. Hunger weakened hands, disease sapped bodies, the cold numbed resolve. By mid-October, casualties from disease and malnutrition were as numerous as those from battle. Every street corner told a story. An abandoned child crying over a parent too weak to rise. A soldier leaning against a wall, shaking from fever and hunger. Families huddled together in the dark, trying to conserve warmth. The defenders had endured the first assaults. They had repelled scaling ladders and destroyed the first mines. But the siege had entered a new, slower, deadlier phase. Vienna would not be destroyed by fire or steel alone. It would be tested by endurance, by the grinding patience of the enemy, and by the bitter cruelty of autumn. And yet, despite hunger, disease, and the cold grip of October, the city did not surrender. Every cannon fired, every wall reinforced, every bucket of boiling pitch poured, represented a single defiance against an empire that seemed unstoppable. The stage was set for the next phase of the siege, where the full fury of Suleiman's army would meet the stubborn resilience of Vienna. By late October, the siege had shifted into a relentless rhythm of attack, pressure, and terror. The Ottomans, having tested Vienna's walls with their initial assaults and probing mines, began the first phase of sustained bombardment. Each day brought a new wave of cannon fire, artillery placement, and psychological warfare designed to wear down defenders and civilians alike. Before dawn, the city stirred to the low, ominous rumble of cannon fire. The first volleys struck the southern and eastern walls, battering stone already weakened by the Ottoman mines. Iron balls thudded against the ramparts, sending shards of masonry raining down onto the streets. The defenders returned fire, hurling leaden balls and firing the city's small cannons from atop towers. Smoke filled the air, mingling with the autumn fog to create a choking haze. Each volley brought debris, dust, and terror into homes, workshops, and crowded streets. Artillery crews worked tirelessly, adjusting the aim of culverins and falconets, reloading under a hail of enemy arrows. Sparks leapt from gunpowder as gunners fought to keep the cannons firing. Even the slightest miscalculation could lead to disaster, a premature explosion, a misfired round. But Vienna's defenders held their discipline. Cannon fire was not the only weapon the Ottomans used to destabilize Vienna. As darkness fell, light cavalry and specialized raiding parties patrolled just beyond the walls, testing defenses, loosing arrows, and creating constant noise. These night raids had two purposes. First, they wore down soldiers who were already exhausted by the cold, hunger, and disease. Sleep became fragmented as sentries stayed awake through long watches, listening for the faintest rustle of enemy movement. Second, the raids acted as psychological warfare. Every arrow loosed, every shout, every clash of steel in the darkness reminded the city's inhabitants that they were trapped. Occasionally, Ottoman engineers set small fires in abandoned suburbs or fields near the walls, illuminating the night and forcing defenders to reveal their positions. The city's defenders countered with lanterns and torches, creating a game of light and shadow along the ramparts. Though full-scale assaults had yet to return, the threat of ladders and siege towers loomed ever-present. The Ottomans had learned the city's defensive habits, studying how soldiers moved along the parapets, where artillery was concentrated, and which sections of the wall were weakest. Small groups of janissaries would approach at dusk, testing the defenders' reactions. Rocks, boiling pitch, and volleys of arrows repelled most. But the city's leaders knew that sustained pressure could one day create a breach. Every hour on the wall was a test of nerves, endurance, and skill. The bombardment and harassment began to take a toll on civilians. Families huddled in basements, homes shaken by cannon impact. Children cried at night, frightened by the roar and the tremor of stone. Water became harder to carry as courtyards and streets became littered with debris. Food, already rationed, grew more precious. Families shared what little remained. Bread, boiled roots, and scraps became common meals. Even the wealthiest households felt the pressure, hoarding only small portions for their own survival. Disease spread faster in this environment. Sore throats, fevers, and dysentery became commonplace as exhaustion and malnutrition compromised the city's defenses. Every day, more people succumbed, not to swords or arrows, but to the creeping, invisible hand of attrition. The Viennese defenders, however, refused to submit. Improvised artillery platforms were reinforced. Holes in walls caused by cannon fire were filled with timber, rubble, and earth. Sentries doubled their vigilance, looking for signs of mining, ladders, or hidden raiding parties. Von Salm and Roggendorf moved tirelessly along the walls, rallying soldiers, inspecting fortifications, and adjusting strategies in real time. Where Ottoman mines threatened, defenders dug counter-tunnels, often meeting the enemy underground in brutal, silent combat. At times, women and older men were pressed into service, hauling stones, boiling water, and pouring pitch onto ladders or enemy formations. Every hand mattered, every act contributed to the defense. The Ottomans also understood the psychological dimension of siege. Fires, smoke, constant noise, and relentless threat created a feeling that Vienna was under siege 24 hours a day. The roar of artillery was constant, a drumbeat reminding the city that they were surrounded. Messengers brought reports from other towns. Some already burned, others surrendered without resistance. Vienna's citizens could see the Ottoman army's organization and efficiency, realizing the size and reach of the force they faced. Fear was as much a weapon as any cannon. Yet in response, Vienna's walls became a symbol of defiance. Soldiers braced for the next wave, civilians learned to adapt to the nightly terror, and leaders reinforced the city's resolve. By the end of October, the city had endured weeks of constant bombardment and harassment. Walls were scarred but standing, miners dug cautiously, met by countermeasures. Civilians had grown thinner but more disciplined in rationing. Sentries had grown sharper and soldiers more determined. The Ottomans had tested Vienna. They had applied pressure in every way possible, above ground, below ground, in body and mind. But the city had not broken. And yet the defenders understood that the real storm had not yet arrived. Suleiman's ultimate assault, the full force of his army and artillery, was still to come. The city had survived the preliminary attacks, but the coming days would decide whether Vienna could withstand the might of the Ottoman Empire. The night air settled over the walls. Smoke from the city mingled with the fires of the enemy camp, painting the plains with a dark, restless glow. Somewhere beyond the walls, Ottoman soldiers slept fitfully, their minds filled with the anticipation of the next day. Within Vienna, sentries stared into the night, ears attuned to every footstep, every whisper, every creak of stone. The siege had intensified. The struggle for Vienna had truly begun. By early November, Vienna's defenders had endured over a month of relentless siege. Walls battered, civilians weakened, soldiers exhausted, and the city's stores dwindling. Every day felt like an eternity. Yet even in the midst of despair, the faintest hope began to stir. News of approaching relief forces. Scouts returning from the surrounding hills brought whispers first, then more confident reports. Contingents from the Holy Roman Empire were moving toward Vienna. Small cavalry units had been spotted on distant roads, banners visible at dawn, glinting in the weak autumn sun. For the soldiers and citizens alike, the news was intoxicating. After weeks of fear and deprivation, the thought that help might come rekindled courage. Guards on the walls paused to look toward the horizon, squinting through fog and smoke, imagining the reinforcements they so desperately needed. Yet even hope was tinged with caution. Reports varied, some exaggerated, some uncertain. Relief forces might be days away or weeks, and every hour that passed was another for Ottoman mines, cannon fire, and night raids to take their toll. Von Salm and Roggendorf knew the Ottomans would not wait idly. The city needed to be ready, both to hold until relief arrived and to repel a final, decisive assault. Defensive preparations intensified. Damaged sections of walls were patched with earth and timber. Trenches were deepened and sharpened. Artillery was moved to the most vulnerable points, with overlapping fields of fire to maximize damage. Civilians were organized to reinforce barricades, carry ammunition, and assist with basic medical care. Every man and woman was made aware that the coming days would determine Vienna's fate. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by determination. If they could hold the city for a few more days, relief might turn the tide. Suleiman's scouts reported the approaching relief forces almost as soon as Vienna heard the news. The Sultan understood that delay could work against him. The longer the siege continued, the more the enemy might consolidate and bring reinforcements. As a result, Ottoman attacks grew bolder. Artillery fire intensified, targeting repaired sections of walls. Night raids became more frequent and aggressive, seeking to exhaust the defenders. Miners redoubled efforts underground, attempting to create breaches before relief could arrive. Yet, despite the pressure, the city held. Every cannon shot, every arrow loosed, every wall reinforced, bought precious time. From atop St. Stephen's Cathedral and the southern towers, sentries reported distant clouds of dust on the horizon, first small, then growing. Cavalry units moving in disciplined formations, infantry columns marching steadily, banners snapping in the wind. Excitement rippled through the city. Soldiers whispered to one another, "The Emperor's men are coming. We may yet survive this." Even civilians felt a surge of hope. Mothers held children a little tighter, eyes scanning the horizon not for smoke and banners of doom, but for allies who might finally lift the siege. Suleiman, realizing the relief forces might arrive within days, launched a desperate push to break the city. Artillery rained down like never before. Cannons of every size fired in concert, battering walls already weakened by previous bombardments and mines. The city shook with each strike. Roofs splintered, streets filled with dust, and stones flew from damaged parapets. At night, janissaries and sappers attempted to breach the walls at multiple points simultaneously. Scaling ladders appeared under the cover of darkness, and the earth trembled with tunneling and explosions. Defenders responded with volleys of musket fire, boiling oil, pitch, and sharpened stakes. Every man, woman, and child capable of action was pressed into service. For hours, the battle raged with unbearable intensity. It was no longer merely a siege. It was a war of survival, a desperate clash of wills between the city and the empire. Then, on the morning of November 12th, the distant dust clouds revealed their truth. The relief forces had arrived. Cavalry units surged forward, banners of the Holy Roman Empire waving proudly in the wind. Soldiers shouted, drums rolled, and the Ottomans realized they were about to be caught between the city they had failed to break and an army approaching from the rear. The psychological effect was immediate. Ottoman morale wavered. Suleiman, for the first time during the siege, faced the reality that Vienna might not be taken. Some units hesitated, others retreated slightly to reorganize. Inside Vienna, spirits soared. Soldiers manned the walls with renewed vigor. Civilians dared to hope that the nightmare would soon end. Even the wounded and sick felt a spark of life return. As the relief army engaged the Ottoman forces outside the city, Vienna's defenders poured every remaining ounce of energy into the assault. Cannons fired from the walls with renewed precision. Arrows and musket shots flew at exposed enemy troops. Boiling pitch and stones struck ladders and siege towers, still attempting to scale the battered walls. The coordination between the defenders and the approaching forces proved decisive. Suleiman's army, stretched thin and exhausted from weeks of siege, could not maintain the offensive under pressure from both inside and outside the walls. By late afternoon, it became clear. The Ottomans had failed to breach Vienna before reinforcements arrived. The first siege, though brutal and destructive, had not succeeded. By mid-November, the First Siege of Vienna reached its conclusion, not with the walls collapsing, nor with the city falling to the Sultan's forces, but with the slow, disciplined retreat of the Ottoman army. Weeks of relentless bombardment, tunneling, night raids, hunger, and disease had taken their toll, and the arrival of relief forces from the Holy Roman Empire made the position untenable for Suleiman. Suleiman the Magnificent, observing from his grand pavilion south of Vienna, weighed the situation carefully. His army had endured weeks of logistical strain, the exhaustion of constant operations, and casualties not just from combat, but from the harsh autumn weather, disease, and supply difficulties. The arrival of imperial reinforcements complicated matters. Their cavalry, disciplined and mobile, threatened to cut off Ottoman supply lines and leave the army vulnerable to counterattack. Suleiman, known for both patience and prudence, recognized that continuing the siege risked annihilation. Orders went out in terse, deliberate commands. Artillery was withdrawn. Siege towers and ladders were dismantled. Camps were packed, tents folded, and supply trains prepared. The retreat would be orderly, but its urgency was unmistakable. The retreat was a spectacle of both precision and exhaustion. Tens of thousands of troops, cavalry, and infantry moved in long columns across mud-churned plains. Wagon trains groaned under the weight of provisions, siege equipment, and personal belongings. Cannons were hauled by oxen and horses, their crews moving quickly to avoid the threat of sudden engagement by approaching relief forces. Despite the withdrawal, Suleiman ensured discipline remained firm. Stragglers were rounded up. Rear guards maintained vigilance against harassment from the imperial cavalry. Every step of the retreat was orchestrated to protect the army, its dignity, and its strategic capability for future campaigns. From the city walls, Vienna's defenders observed the Ottoman host with a mixture of awe and relief. The same army that had seemed invincible weeks before now looked weary, slowed by the weight of its own ambition and the harshness of the terrain. Within Vienna, the end of the First Siege brought a cautious euphoria. Soldiers and civilians alike began to assess the damage. Walls had been scarred, towers partially destroyed, and gates battered, but the city had survived. Homes had been damaged by artillery or fire, and disease and malnutrition had claimed lives, yet Vienna still stood. The city's leaders moved quickly. Engineers inspected and reinforced weakened sections of the walls. Surgeons tended to the wounded, while priests offered comfort to the sick and bereaved. Supplies, though diminished, were reorganized and rationed to restore some semblance of normality. The human cost of the siege was heavy. Thousands had perished from disease, hunger, and battle. Families mourned missing members. Soldiers counted the dead and wounded, many of whom would never return to the walls. Yet despite the suffering, there was pride in survival. Vienna had endured what seemed impossible, repelling the might of Suleiman's forces and standing firm against overwhelming odds. Civilians played a critical role in this victory, often at great personal risk. Women and children who had carried water, munitions, and supplies to the defenders were hailed for their courage. Men who had labored in the tunnels, shoring up walls and countering Ottoman mining efforts, were celebrated as heroes. The city's endurance became a symbol of unity and determination against an invincible-seeming enemy. From his pavilion, Suleiman viewed the retreat with a mixture of disappointment and calculation. Vienna had not fallen, but the campaign had demonstrated vulnerabilities in the city's defenses and the limits of endurance for both men and machines. Suleiman would live to return, knowing the lessons learned in this failed siege would shape future strategies. Yet for the moment, the Sultan accepted that the campaign had reached its limit. The retreat was orderly, preserving the core of his army and its morale, ensuring that the Ottoman Empire remained a formidable force despite the setback. The First Siege of Vienna became a defining moment in European history. For the citizens and defenders, it was proof that discipline, courage, and preparation could resist even the most powerful empire. For the Ottomans, it was a lesson in logistics, strategy, and the limits of siege warfare in hostile terrain and against determined defenders. Monuments, records, and oral histories in Vienna would preserve the memory of those who fought and those who suffered. Soldiers who survived recounted tales of boiling pitch, scaling ladders, and underground combat. Civilians spoke of nights filled with terror, prayers, and relentless vigilance. The city's collective memory would be forever shaped by the siege, its story passed down as an emblem of resilience. When the last Ottoman campfires disappeared over the horizon, Vienna breathed a collective sigh. The siege had ended, but the scars remained. Streets, towers, and homes bore marks of battle. Families mourned, rebuilt, and adapted. Soldiers returned to their posts, ever watchful for future threats. The First Siege had tested Vienna in every conceivable way, through cannon fire, mining, night raids, hunger, disease, and relentless psychological pressure. Its survival became a symbol of defiance, resilience, and human endurance against overwhelming odds. Suleiman's army retreated, but the knowledge that the Ottomans would return remained in the minds of all. Vienna had survived the first storm, but history whispered that this would not be the last time the city faced the Sultan's wrath.